The developed world appears to be botching the adoption of EVs, and here in Australia, senior executive policy making morons are doing their bit to make sure that we remain on track on the superhighway to fictional electric utopia. In fact, insofar as I can tell, we are almost, but not quite, at peak botch. I'm John Cadogan from Expert.com.au, and I get new cars cheap. Australia only. Website. Card. Now, let us say you're down at the local meeting of the Tesla cult one day and you sip on the Kool-Aid a little too enthusiastically. You find yourself driving home in a brand new Tesla Model Y. So virtuous. Unfortunately, however, you have a minor crash on the way home and these dreams of electric utopia suddenly evaporate because the logistics and the overall management framework of an alternative transport system just doesn't exist. This video is brought to you by Manscaped, which is of course trusted by more than 8 million men worldwide for trimmers, hygiene, grooming and premium boxers. Brand new this month, the Weed Whacker 2.0 nose and ear hair trimmer. Have you ever seen an ad on any dating site that says, "Wanted, man of any age, height or build, education and socio-economic status, irrelevant, must have excessive nose hair"? Me neither. Knocking on that door with a veritable Garden of Eden sprouting from your nose. It's just a bit too organic for a first date, and so easy to fix. The second generation Manscaped Weed Whacker uses a grunty 7,000 RPM motor with an improved steel blade system for upgraded weed whacking performance. It comes with skin-safe technology, it's cordless, rechargeable, and it has a battery with up to 45 minutes of runtime. That's rather a lot of cumulative weed whacking. The Weed Whacker 2.0 is standard in all Manscaped tool sets like the Platinum Package 4.0 and the Performance Package 4.0, so henceforth you will receive the new Weed Whacker 2.0 nose and ear hair trimmer in those sets. At the risk of oversharing, and I did think about this for 2 or 3 seconds, I can tell you that the older you get, the better you get at growing ear and nose hair. So, yay. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but thankfully, with the Weed Whacker 2.0, there is a simple grooming solution at hand. Whack those weeds at will, dude. In other words, just keep your nose clean. Go to manscaped.com/autoexpert today and you'll get 20% off plus free international shipping when you use the promo code AEJC at checkout. That's 20% off plus free shipping with promo code AEJC at manscaped.com/autoexpert. Thank you, Manscaped, for your commitment to the whacking of unwanted weeds across the well-groomed world. There's been no shortage of electric teething problems, has there? I mean, there's the fire problem, the Felicity Ace, and building regulations generally. They really haven't coped with the rapid adoption of EVs, have they? You know, so that's kind of a teething problem. Then there's, of course, the charging infrastructure problem. Anyone who travels at peak holiday periods is aware of the endless queues at the inadequate number of charging stations there are out in the boonies. And then, of course, there's the grid upgrade problem, which is perhaps at its most prolific in apartment complexes and things of that nature, because where is all of this electricity going to come from without overwhelming the local grid system? Nobody is on the front foot with this. Then there's the minerals shortages that effectively mean that none of those hyper-ambitious targets to terminate the sales of internal combustion vehicles by 2030 or something are actually going to be met. So that's kind of a problem as well. There are many mining insiders saying words to the effect of, "We don't know where the lithium is going to come from to meet the projected demand," right? So that's kind of a problem too. And then there's light vehicles, just like your car, all right? These only make up 8% of our total greenhouse emissions. So if we go 100% Harry Potter on this, we wave electric wand around and everybody's driving an EV, that only makes 8% difference in Australia's total emissions. Electric cars are being used as a smokescreen because vested interest groups don't want you to think about the big issues and the complexity of solving the climate problem, because we have to tackle things like coal and gas, which literally light up our lives and also are major export earners for the nation. Solving the climate problem is hard, okay? But EVs are easy and we can all relate to cars. So that's kind of what's happening here. And then there's consumer sentiment, because most Australians do not want an EV. At least they don't want a current EV, because that car will not do what they want it to do, or it will be monstrously too expensive. These are big hurdles to overcome currently. In fact, when you look at the sales figures, 3 of the top 10 vehicles, including numbers 1 and Duos, are big, fat, lardy-ass, diesel-burning, four-wheel drive utes. It's pretty hard to get past that. And, of course, another 4 of those are SUVs, so that's kind of 7 out of the top 10 vehicles. And, yeah, there's a couple of Teslas last month in the top 10, but 7 out of 10, there is basically no mainstream widespread thirst for electric vehicles. That's just hyperbole, a myth, a spin campaign. Look at what people actually buy, okay? And of course, you have to remember that our proud nation, girt by sea, Shecha, effectively doubles its CO2 emissions every year by proxy, owing to all of the coal and gas that we export, and that number is increasing. Now, if you're one of those, let's call them half-wits, who would like to tell me that CO2 is plant food and therefore climate change is just a hoax, then have at it in the comments, dude. Like, hey, free country. But I'm not a shot caller, so my challenge to you is go to the Pentagon's website and locate the Joint Chiefs of Staff and send the chairman of the Joint Chiefs an email alerting him to this revelation, because he's busy, and his various subordinates, of which there are millions, are busy making plans to deal with all the geopolitical unrest that is going to flow as an inevitable consequence of climate change. So when you get him on side, get back to me, dude, and I'll reverse my opinion on this, but I won't be a breath holden on this one. It'd be nice if you could get NASA and NOAA and the Bureau of Meteorology here on side as well, because they're fairly credible sources and they all say it's real, as does the objective anecdotal evidence of one's own eyes. So there's that. Right. There's also the EV obesity problem, which is kind of significant, because that leads to these big, heavy vehicles lead to excessive tyre wear, and there's the particles that flow from that, and also the fact that tyres are a pretty energy-dense thing to manufacture, and the weight of these vehicles also damages the roads more than light cars. And let's not forget, EV6s and Ioniq 5s and Tesla Model Ys and things like that, they're just as heavy as a big, fat four-wheel drive ute. So they do just as much damage to the roads, which, let's not forget, are made of hydrocarbons and are repaired using hydrocarbon materials and energy. So there's that, okay? And now it seems that there's another teething problem that we all should be aware of and lobby our politicians about, because in a sense, this is even more serious, right? It seems that EV insurance premiums are through the roof because insurers are busily writing off EVs after only minor crashes, just in case there's damage to the battery, which seems a very conservative approach, but they have their reasons. Ooh, rebound. See, repairers can't diagnose the batteries because arsehole car makers don't disclose diagnostic data and techniques. They don't provide repairers with the tools they need to investigate the status of batteries in minor crash-involved EVs, so the batteries end up going in the bin even if they are completely viable. Even if the battery is damaged in a minor way, 95% of the cells within it are probably viable, and they could be repurposed hypothetically, potentially, morally and ethically. That's something of an imperative, don't you think? But things aren't working out this way. Bonus points to Electric Jesus on this one, because although he didn't found Tesla, he did turn it into a cult, so there's that. He also made electric vehicles cool, and I give him full points for that. I'm not being a cynical bastard when I say that. He's the only dude who managed to make electric cars cool, so credit where it's due, but he has sort of dropped the ball on the battery in the Model Y, don't you think? And he sold it to morons on the basis of it being structural, so this is purportedly a triumph for efficiency, and it also constrains costs. But here's what happens, right? You get a big metal box and you put battery cells in it, and then you fill it up with glue and make it into a structural element in the car. Problem being, the battery is not repairable. And that's not just my opinion, okay? Sandy Munro? Historically a bit of a Tesla fanboy, and he's the cheese at Munro and Associates, which kind of pulls cars apart for kicks and investigates how they're designed and offers feedback to car makers, and he's a bit of a cheese at all of this stuff. He recently told Reuters that a Model Y battery has, quote, zero repairability. This is the biggest, most expensive component in the vehicle, and also the component with the most embodied CO2 by virtue of its manufacturing. Okay, so that's kind of a serious issue. He actually said, quote, a Tesla structural battery is going straight to the grinder. He meant in the aftermath of a minor crash, because it's not repairable, right? And this is exactly where you don't want a big energy-dense thing with a lot of CO2 embodied in its manufacture to go if you give a shit about the climate. And it's also what humanity can't afford, right? Because there's so much CO2 involved in the manufacturing, right? About 100 kilos of CO2 is emitted for every 1 kilowatt hour of electric vehicle battery capacity that you create if you're a battery manufacturer in China. And it makes sense to use China as the benchmark here, because 75 to 80% of all of the world's lithium-ion batteries are manufactured in China. So, balance of probability, the lithium-ion battery you're using to watch this video on, or to which you are powering your phone or your EV or your power tools or whatever else, your flashlight, balance of probability, it came from China, and every kilowatt hour is 100 kilos of CO2 that is already up there. That's kind of important to remember. So if you look at a big heavy EV shitter like a Model Y or a Kia EV6 or a Hyundai Ioniq 5 or Ioniq 6, we're talking about 7 or 8 tonnes of CO2 already up there in the atmosphere before that vehicle turns without burning, right? Or burns by proxy, at least in Australia, because it's burning coal, it's just burning it by proxy over the horizon, yeah? So, Christophe Unpronounceable here from the Allianz Centre for Technology. So he's the cheese of research there, basically well-funded sub-organisation of the big fat insurance company. He basically told Reuters, if you throw away the vehicle, this is a quote, at an early stage, so if you throw away the vehicle at an early stage, you pretty much lost all advantage in terms of CO2 emissions, end quote. This embodied upfront CO2 is why EVs need to be driven tens of thousands of kilometres just to break even compared with internal combustion vehicles. And this is in places where the grid is green. You still need to drive tens of thousands of kilometres to break even. And in Australia, you need to drive a lot further than that because our grid is filthy. Now, there's a dude named Matthew Avery next. He is the cheese of research at Thatcham Research, get it right. And he echoed Mr. Unpronounceable's concerns. He said, quote, "We're buying electric cars for sustainability reasons, but an EV isn't very sustainable if you've got to throw away the battery after a minor collision." Hear, hear, Mr. Avery. This seems obvious. Seems obvious to me. I'm tipping it seems obvious to you. Why does it not seem obvious to insurers and regulators, policymakers and people of that nature? How fucking hard would it be to get the details right? Now, it also appears that recycling the batteries in many markets is just a complete fantasy. Like, that's just a piece of spin. It was supposed to be a circular economy, right? Once the batteries reach the end of their lives for whatever reason, we just recover the materials and go again, right? Well, in the UK, which admittedly is a lot further down the superhighway to mythical electric utopia than we are, have a guess how many EV battery recycling facilities there are. Big fat zero, dude. Amazing, isn't it? You know, here in Australia, there's no legislation mandating the recycling of lithium-ion batteries in EVs. Stewardship doesn't exist, okay? Our slightly less shit Prime Minister than previously and our marginally less shit Environment Minister, they're too busy getting us to try to buy EVs than they are to bother with those pesky integration details, which to me is just a regulatory travesty. We don't seem to have any flat-out experts in government anymore. We rely on these consultants who are really just lobbyists, pushing the barrows of big coal and big gas and dressed up with sexy names like the Electric Vehicle Council and things of that nature, but really serving what could only be described as ulterior motives, motives that are ulterior to the virtuous ones of preventing excessive climate change and things of that nature. So I don't know why we let that happen either, but the bottom line is that we need to do everything we can to make sure that there is a mandate to recycle the freaking batteries so they don't get just into the groundwater and poison a whole bunch of people. How hard is it, you know? I'm sure there's a bunch of industrial chemists who could go, that's a problem, okay? Why do governments fail to see this kind of thing? And why am I having such a shot at it? Well, in the UK, again, much further down the road than us to Electric Utopia, a company you've never heard of, which is called Synetic, SYNETIQ, which probably seemed like a good idea at the time. It's the UK's biggest vehicle salvage operation, okay? So it's where written-off vehicles go to die, basically, okay? So I'm inferring it's rather a long way from Chelsea or the Royal Borough of Knightsbridge or something, right? Synetic rips the batteries out of written-off cars, and guess what it does with them? It stores them in freaking shipping containers, which is kind of how the former Soviet Union dealt with the storage of highly enriched uranium just before the collapse of that regime. So unlikely to end well. Hundreds of EV batteries and thousands of hybrid batteries are currently stored by Synetic in shipping containers, and I'm tipping they're going to need more containers into the future. That's a bit confronting, isn't it? Most of the batteries that are stored in this way, in limbo, if you like, they're almost certainly undamaged. And even the ones that are slightly damaged are full of the bulk of cells in them being able to be repurposed if we had the framework in place to do these things, to check the batteries, to pull them apart, to identify the defective cells and to repurpose the viable ones. Like, is it really that hard to get this stuff up and running is kind of what I'm saying. Of course, senior regulatory plonkers here, right? They've got all these bigger fish to fry. They can't detain themselves with pesky details such as battery stewardship and getting car makers to share diagnostic and assessment data for batteries and repair techniques. Like, Jesus. There's a stack of natural gas approval projects on Big Tanya's desk, and it's blocking out the frickin' sun, ironically enough. She's a bit concerned with that. Now, it's really interesting to me that they never hold press conferences when they approve these kinds of projects. This is done completely under the radar. You can have a press conference about some chicken shit EV initiative all you want, but if you're just rubber stamping gas project after gas project after gas project, are you really that committed to solving the climate problem? And therefore, how morally and ethically just is it to expect the likes of you and me to bend over and cop it in relation to climate change, which is exactly what we're doing with the price of energy at the moment. Electricity and gas at record levels and unlikely to decrease anytime soon, right? So most car makers say that their battery packs are repairable, but they don't actually share the data about how to repair or assess them, which is unconscionable also. So in practice, they're not repairable at all in the aftermath of a crash. They can't even be assessed as to their post-crash viability. And in markets like the UK, they just fill up endless shipping containers into the future. This is not a management strategy. Okay, this is a botch. It's an epic botch, and we are about to go down exactly this epic botch route here in Australia. We're already laying the foundations, right? Insurers, why do they do this? Why do they write off the EVs after minor collisions? Well, it's pretty simple. They're just shit scared that if they miss one that's got a damaged battery and a family of 5 is burned to death tragically on Sunday morning on the way to frickin' church or something, that has the potential to not only result in a lawsuit, but seriously undermine their multi-million-dollar bullshit advertising campaigns, okay? I guess if you are going to be incinerated, then the time to do that would be on the way home from church, all things considered. Anyway, shot-calling plonkers like Albo and Gassy Tanya, okay? They're just too bogged down in their quest for mediocrity, in my view, to bother with integrating EVs systematically into society and make sure that it all actually works. So how do we turn this particular frown of integrated EV adoption incompetence upside down? How do we do it? I'd suggest do-os things are required. We just need to compel car makers with suitable legislation to share all information relating to the assessment, diagnosis and salvage of batteries. And that needs to flow freely to all parties related to insurance, assessment, salvage, writing off and recycling. How hard is it? Okay. And we need to make sure that somebody carries the can for recycling. And that means there is somebody accountable for recycling particular batteries in particular places at particular times, subject to massive penalties if they don't do the right thing. Because those batteries are going to continue to defecate in their trousers in the manner of a politician in McDonald's, for example. And we need to turn that brown frown upside down. Then, if you're thinking about making the switch to EVs, you need to consider the insurance implications fairly extensively. Because, for example, in the US, a Tesla Model 3 is about $43,000 and a replacement battery is about 20 grand. It doesn't take very long, therefore, on the depreciation curve for that car for the cost of replacement of the battery to exceed the value of the car and therefore to make it economically irrational to replace the battery if you're in a crash or whatever, and the battery is part of the repair scenario for that vehicle. So you should also expect major fluctuations in insurance premiums over the next few years here in Australia because the EV base is so small now and the actuaries are crunching their numbers off such a small base. And when there are more EVs on the road, there could be significant evolution in the insurance premiums, is what I'm saying, right? Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed driving an EV for a year. I'm not anti-EV. I actually loved driving that car. I loved never going to the filling station. It was a Kona electric. And I loved being able to charge at home. Those things are fantastic. It's also fantastic that you don't emit any tailpipe pollution in our densely populated cities if you drive an EV, because that's a major health issue. And if EVs were widely enough adopted, that would be a significant boost to our energy security, which is a major issue for Australia because we're so dependent on foreign oil, which often is sourced from geopolitically unstable regions. Lots of insufferable twats love to drive around in EVs, and there's no law against being one of those, I suppose. But if you are expecting the logistics and regulatory framework for EV adoption to get sorted out during the period in which you own your current EV, or you change to an EV and you're owning your first one, if you expect all this crap to get sorted out in the period in which you own that car, then I'd suggest that you are barking up entirely the wrong pillar of photosynthesizing sequestered carbon. Dude.